when we were first putting this presentation together, we wanted to make sure that we had the best subject matter expert that we could possibly find to participate in this session. But that person turned us down. And then we wanted to get the best technical expert that we could possibly find for this presentation, and that person turned us down. So then we wanted to get the best looking presenter that we could find. And since Craig Appaneal had turned us down twice already, he finally relented, and he's going to do this presentation. So let me tell you about Craig. Craig is with the Center for Creative Leadership. CCL is a global leader in terms of providing leadership excellence courses. They've been in business since, 1970 or so. Every year they support or service over 20,000 individuals at more than 2,000 companies, including roughly 80 of the Fortune 100 organizations. Craig is a practitioner with CCL's research group. He's going to talk a little bit about CCL's applied research, especially as it relates to boundary-spanning leadership within social networks. And a little bit more about Craig. He's got some roots here in New England. He's based down in North Carolina. He's got a master's degree in, I'm blanking, from Columbia?
Organizational psychology.
Organizational psychology. So please welcome Craig Appaneal.
So thank you for that very flattering introduction. So again, complex adaptive systems, shift happens. Okay, so I think that's one of the lessons that I heard this morning, is that shift happens, and we're stepping in shift all the time. Okay, so this is the reality of the world. Things change, you have to adapt. So like I said, I don't have a presentation because we're missing an adapter, but maybe we'll be able to pull up something later in the presentation to show you some of these ideas into action that I'll be talking about. Okay, but the good news is that we have the main props right in our hand. So we don't need PowerPoint. Thank God, there's too much PowerPoint in the world today. And one thing that I want to do is, let's get messy. These rows are way too confining. Spread out a little bit so that you could actually lay out some of these cards on the seat next to you. If you need to reposition chairs, do so. But let's make this a little bit informal, and so we can really engage in this exercise of spanning boundaries in organizations. Okay, so collaboration becomes exponentially harder when we're dealing with people. We're flawed. We carry a lot of baggage, and Rob and I were having a discussion last night. There's O&A, which is very technical, so bringing it back to the gorilla. Sometimes we're passing the balls, or we're counting the balls with such focus. And actually, I was going to use that as an introduction. And so when you saw it, I was like, thank God I decided not to do that. But we're so focused on counting the balls at times that we forget about the gorilla walking across the room. Okay, we don't see the obvious. And so Rob and I have been talking about, or in the past we've talked about, the difference between figure and ground. So in Rob's world, the ground is O&A, or the figure is O&A. Okay, so we look at things through structure. We look at things through decision rights and information. At CCL, we look at things through relationships. Okay, so there's tasks, structures, decision rights, and then there's relationships. And so we focus on the relationships, and what we find, working with executives for 40 years, is that relationship skills are difficult to develop, difficult to learn, very difficult to sustain, and extremely difficult to change. Okay, so this idea of change and how do we change as people is really salient when we're talking about collaboration in a complex adaptive system. So within this vein of working in a complex world that has lots of boundaries, we began a research project about a decade ago. And it was first just looking at leadership across differences and what are the challenges that leaders have when working across boundaries of many types. So we went to 6 continents, interviewed hundreds of executives, surveyed thousands of executives, and we surveyed in our Leadership at the Peak program, which runs in Colorado Springs, and it's really designed for the C-level executives. We asked them how important is leading across differences, collaborating across boundaries. And I believe it was 98% of them said, very important. And then we asked them to say, well, what's your skill level? And only 14% said, we're pretty good at this. They're not even very good at it. They're just pretty good at it. So this was a huge gap in our research. It was the biggest gap of its kind in our 40 years of doing this kind of research with leaders. So we knew we were onto something. Okay, so what we did is we took all of this data, all of this research, and we wrote a book. And this is a card deck. This is a tool that all of you have, and it's a tool that helps explain the importance and how to lead across boundaries. Okay, so this is going to be our guide for the rest of the morning. Okay, and the first card, we all just look at the first card. This gives you information about why we need to span boundaries. Okay, and any view of Rob's diagrams will show many boundaries, and it's pretty obvious why we have to span them, especially in a global economy. Okay, so this is kind of your getting started card. Let's put that one aside. Okay, the next card is basically giving a little background about the research and about the tool. And then my colleague Chris Ernst, who was probably the guy that Sean was referring to. Great guy. He always says that they took a 200 and some odd page book and narrowed it down to 21 cards, and you don't have to read the book anymore. But of course, Chris is a good guy, and you guys should all read the book. It's a good read. So card number 4 is where we get into building the model of spanning across boundaries. Okay, this is a key card. Now, if we were at tables, we would have you clear the decks, and we'd have you lay out the cards one by one in this fashion. Okay, but again, we're going to improvise here. So if you want to lay these cards down in a chair or on the floor or just kind of sift through them, that's fine. But let's go to the card number 5 here. Okay, boundary spanning leadership. What comes to your mind when you hear the word boundary? Just purchasing department. Very good. Good. Barrier.
Not invented here.
Not invented here. Okay. Live with it? Live within it. Okay. This morning, the big aha for me was nestering. Okay, there's a guy that lived within his boundaries. Impermeable. Okay. How about spanning? What words come to mind when you hear the word spanning? Spanning. Creative. Okay. Bridging. Flexible. Okay. And how about leadership? This is this is a tough question. We ask this a lot. Open? Open, okay. Curious. Impact. Enabling others. Okay, there's a lot of definitions in the world about leadership. Probably the most popular is it's the three-legged stool of you have the goal, you have the leader, you have the follower. Okay, those are the 3 legs. We actually at the center, we define leadership as a social process. Okay, so it's actually a process. It is the act of creating direction, alignment, and commitment towards a shared goal. That's how we define leadership at the Center for Creative Leadership. And within the idea of spanning boundaries, it's simply creating direction, alignment, and commitment towards a shared goal across boundaries. Okay, so it seems rather simple, okay, but of course, implementing this and creating all of those things is quite a challenge. Okay, so the definition for boundary spanning leadership is on the back of that card. Okay, so you can take that home and look at it. Okay, then the next cards, 6 through 10. Okay, these are boundaries. These are the boundaries that, through our research, through our interviews, these themes kept coming up. So we'd like to say that these are universal themes around boundaries. Okay, so you have vertical boundaries. So these are the boundaries that are hierarchical in nature, okay, going up and down the organization. Horizontal boundaries are working across peer groups. Okay, can be very challenging at times. Stakeholder is when we're working with either clients or perhaps as shareholders, the community. Demographic is working across differences that can include gender, it can include religion, culture, and then finally, geography. This is self-explanatory. Okay, so this is where I want to learn from you. Okay, so we're going to do a little exercise, vote with your feet. Okay, I don't like the rows here, but what we're going to do, actually, we won't vote with our feet. Okay, I'm going to take that back. It's going to be too messy. I like messy, but not that messy. Let's do a vote with your cards here. So I want you to think about, where is your organization at its best? What boundary is your organization best at moving up and down or across in your everyday life? So where are you in your organization at its best? And just hold up that card. Okay, so I'm seeing some vertical, some horizontal. Demographic, good. Stakeholder. Okay. I would, just from a quick count here, I would probably say that you can only do one card. Can't be both can't be best at two things at once. I would say that, just a quick view, vertical was probably the most prevalent. Okay, not a scientific count here, but vertical, that actually coincides with what we found, is that most organizations are really comfortable working within the hierarchy. Okay, now, follow-up question is, where are we most challenged? Where do we run into problems? So hold up that card and keep it up so other people can see it. I really don't know if there's a discernible pattern here. Does anyone have any? I'm seeing a lot of horizontal. I'm seeing a lot of demographic and a lot of geographic. So what our research is showing is that horizontal is actually the most challenging for leaders, working across your peer groups. Okay, so, but what we use these cards within the demographics or within the boundaries is helping people try to understand, make sense of the challenges that they're hitting day in and day out. Okay, so when we put this into practice, right now we would have a discussion about what does that mean. Okay, so what does it mean? Now, how does it feel when you run into one of those boundaries? So we all held up a card. We all put a vote in. What does that look like? What does that feel like when you're running into that boundary where you're really not good at it, where the organization isn't good at it? Any thoughts? Frustrating. Anxious. Ineffective. Opportunities. Opportunities, okay. That's a good insight, right? Okay, so how about when we're doing things well? Think about a time when things have gone well. Engaged. Energetic. Okay, inspiring. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to build awareness with people about these boundaries. These are common boundaries that we run across, we hit. They're going to make you actually either going to work harder, be more excited, or they're going to stop you dead in your tracks And like Rob likes to say, it's that black hole of energy that just sucks out all momentum, all innovation. So as we dug into this, we formed 3 strategies that can be used and applied to help people span these boundaries, to overcome these obstacles. Okay, and that's the next 3 cards that if you just look at cards 11, 12, and 13. Okay, we have first managing boundaries, then forging common ground, and then discovering new frontiers. Okay, so on the back of each of these cards, it gives an explanation of what we mean by each of these strategies. Okay, now take a look at card 11. And what does this fence say to you? What does it mean? When you look at this image, what do you think about when you see a fence? Closed-minded. Okay, no crossing. It's a limit. Okay? But fences are also important because they keep us together. They keep us safe. They keep bad things out. Okay, so as human beings, we have a strong desire to be safe, to be unique. Okay, so we also have a very strong urge to integrate. Okay, so we hold these dual primary tasks of being unique, but yet we want to integrate and work in a social system. Okay, so there's always that tension that we're always trying to navigate. So these boundaries give you, or these strategies give you a roadmap on how to get to that magic quadrant of discovering new frontiers. Okay, so what's funny about the research, well, it's not really funny, it's interesting, is that these strategies should be followed in order. Okay, think about building a bridge. If you build a bridge without a firm foundation on either side, what happens to that bridge? If you start putting weight on it, it collapses. Right? So the most counterintuitive piece of this research is the importance of managing the boundaries, of identifying and solidifying the boundaries. So Jack Welch, came out with the boundaryless organization. We actually think that's crap. I mean, first of all, it's never going to happen, and then we need boundaries. If we don't have boundaries, we're exposed. We're not safe. Okay, so that's the critical first step, is to actually get your teams together and to solidify the boundaries so that the groups can feel safe, and then they can follow the progression of eventually transforming and working together. Okay, so what I want you to do now is take a look at the next, let's see, cards 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. These are the practices, okay? And these practices are actually color-coded, okay, so people like Sean can use them. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So they're color-coded to match the strategies. Okay, so within managing boundaries, we have 2 behavioral practices, buffering and reflecting, that help leaders actually achieve those goals, achieve those strategies, execute them. Within the forging common ground strategy, we have connecting and mobilizing. Okay, so again, these are behavioral items that we can see, we can view, we can measure, and teach people how to do these things within organizations. And then we have weaving and transforming, and these are the discovering new frontier strategies. So this is really when you're you're clicking on all cylinders and you're really driving forward. So what I want you to do, maybe just in pairs, is share a story of when you were actually doing one of these practices. So quickly just take a look at each of these practices, read them, reflect on them, or even just look at the pictures. You don't have to read. And just think about when you were doing that and share that with someone next to you. Share that story. And let's just take a couple minutes to share and learn from each other on that. Okay? So we're getting close to lunch here, and does anyone want to share their stories? Can anyone share their story for the sake of the group? Anyone want to share their story for the sake of the group? Yes, Penny.
We were just discussing that over the last few years, sort of as this growing nature of collaborativeness and consensus building has come around, I found myself in a couple of leadership positions where you enter in there's chaos.
Right.
And I found the counter to that is really sort of leading by saying, okay, we're going to divide and conquer. And so aligning that with this concept of first kind of managing the boundaries and thinking about that. And I don't know, I just found myself sort of thinking about the conflict that I created when people didn't think it was okay to divide and conquer, but ultimately maybe what was the right stuff.
Yeah, so we're so kind of, there's such an urgency to get in there and to execute that we need to just drive towards this goal. And everyone's getting on board, get on the bus and drive it. First we have to say, wait a minute. We often say slow down to power up at CCL. It's kind of a lost skill that we seem to have forgotten about, slowing down to powering up. Going into the woods and singing Kumbaya. We think it's a good thing. So any other stories to share?
Yeah, this is actually an observation of a colleague of mine who came in to run what was a very weak account management and sales team, and I was in the marketing function at the time. It was impossible to work with the sales and account team because there were these pockets they hadn't defined who they were. And it is again a boundary definition thing. What he did was create that boundary so that you had a good interface, so that now when you did things, you knew they were going to be effective.
Right.
And it is that counterintuitive thing. Creating boundaries actually made it a lot easier to work with the group, and everybody on both sides was happier.
Yep. I mean, think about what Rob talked about this morning. You know, understanding roles, responsibilities, decision rights. Those are all about boundaries, having good boundaries. Okay, and solidifying those before you start getting into the complex work. Right. So yes.
There's a point to respect those boundaries. We had an experience a number of years ago working with China, and there was a sort of a value that what came from corporate was more important than locally. We sort of had to change the paradigm. It's now focused on what can we learn from each other. Right. So create these learning opportunities that are shared as opposed to one way.
Yeah. So that's a great example. Cultural issues are huge, and so you might be wondering, okay, well, this is great. They're nice cards, and you know, I get the whole boundary thing, but how does this really fit into O&A? Okay, why are we here? And we're here because we've been working with Rob for about 2 years now. And we've been using this as almost a chassis of conducting O&A work. So O&A provides very specific insight into what are the actual boundaries. So we measure the communication network, we measure energy, we measure direction alignment commitment, so our definition of leadership within the network. Okay, so we bring this to the leadership teams. Now, this is a little bit different, perhaps, but Rob's done this a gazillion times, so he's probably done just about everything there is to do with O&A. But what we do that's a little bit different is we're not the experts. So we say, you make sense of it. This is your data. We don't have the context. We don't know the story. So we put it in the middle as a sense-making experience. And then they figure out, they learn from each other. So they actually execute all of these steps and all of these strategies with the O&A data as the focal point. Okay, so they in their teams, and I had this great video that I produced, and I was all excited to show it, and had nice little music that went da-na-na-na. Okay, and so maybe I'll show it a little bit later. But what we do is we have the work groups, natural work groups, make sense of their team data. Okay, so that's buffering. And then they report out to each other. Okay, so they're reflecting, they're learning from each other, they're interacting, so they're getting insights from their colleagues who before they were just kind of on the out group, the them group. Okay, so they're learning from each other, so that's reflecting. Then we do this within connecting, next practice. This is, as of last week, new innovation here. We actually did a human mapping exercise, human network mapping exercise. So in a room like this, we had an executive team of about 25 senior level executives. We basically said, here's someone that has lots of connections. Long story short, organize around this person. You know, figure out how many inbound, outbound ties you have, and you create the network as a team. Okay? And amazingly enough, they self-organized and they replicated their leadership network, okay, just on their own. Okay, so they were making sense of it, making sense of the data, owning it. Okay, then they mobilized. So we had a World Cafe, and we had 3 stations: direction, alignment, commitment. So the question is, with the new strategy, how do we create direction, alignment, commitment? So they all had their turns, they circulated, they made sense. Okay, and then they prioritized and took action. Okay, so all of those practices can be used when looking at O&A data. Okay, so O&A data feeds the content, okay, from a technical perspective, from a technical systems perspective, but it's the people in the learning that needs to happen, in the relationships that need to happen in order for the real development to occur. Okay, because if you have both the tasks, i.e. where the connectors, where the brokers, if you have that information and you have the relationships, then you can change, you can adapt, you can realize new potentials. Okay, so at CCL, we are doing a current research project where we're doing a time 1 O&A study. We're doing a boundary spanning leadership intervention that's a day and a half that takes the real data, brings it into the session with the executive team. They make sense of it. Okay, and then 6 months later, we do a time 2. So the idea is that we believe that you can span the network, and the network can actually it can actually span the boundary behaviors, the boundary spanning behaviors. Okay, so they're not. I said figure and ground earlier. It really is a both and. It is a subtle shift of perspective that lets you see both existing together. Okay, so Rob.
I mean, I'll throw in one of the things that's been interesting to me is I've kind of spanned a boundary working with CCL. I'm very much an analytic guy, right? And I thought last year we took a whole group of GE CEOs out to Colorado Springs, the Olympic training facility, and we've done a network, ideas and things like that, which I was very comfortable with. But then the CCL guys were introducing the kumbaya stuff, right? I was panicked over it. I thought we were going to get killed by these hard-bitten GE CEOs. And one of the really interesting things is it turns out that there's an aspect of it that the network analysis gives you kind of the what, and then the boundary spanning ideas gives you the how discussions that start happening around how are we going to migrate across this. But there's another interesting appeal to this, in that the network ideas hit the analytic and the technical aspect that these people care about, and then you have the process aspect, through this kind of device, and it works unbelievably well. It's been like magic out in those situations.
So we've done this with, so there's a lot of good stories. We've done this in Iraq with the commanding general, Lloyd Austin, and the State Department on how to span those boundaries between state and defense. We've done this with GE, multiple GE locations, GE Aviation, GE Corporate at their officer population, and GE Capital. We're doing this with organizations that I probably can't name right now, so I won't. But we're seeing a lot of results, a lot of excitement around merging these two bodies of knowledge. So we're really bullish on this is a good formula. Okay, if you're thinking, okay, well, I love O&A, but what do I do with it? How can I learn from it? Okay, this isn't about consulting. This isn't about engineering an organization. This is about sense making. It's about learning. It's about leadership. And what we're seeing is that this formula is working, and it's actually fun to do. So a lot of it is improvisational, on the fly, but it's fun. So on that note, I guess that wraps us up here.
Before we leave, I just want to mention Craig is going to be part of a panel this afternoon, and maybe you might be able to check out that feature-length film.
Oh, that would make me happy. It's 3.5 minutes.
Better than playing it on the airplane on the ride home. Right?
Oh man, I've watched this thing a gazillion times, so I need to share. So.